Welcome. Another 4 a.m. episode where sleep is not returning after waking up. And I wanted to talk about attachment. Something I've touched upon in a previous episode in regard to talking about relationships, and I was out walking the other day, and in a moment of reflecting upon the current state of my attachment with a particular person, there was a noticing that things were easing, that there was less physical, mental, emotional pain. I thought it would be good to perhaps look a little bit deeper if possible, perhaps understanding a little bit more what formed the attachment and how it's being dissolved. And in my perhaps limited understanding, it feels like the attachment began the moment I was relating to that person from my identity. And it's almost as if I was weaving sort of little strings from me to that person, and if you can imagine a very complex, beautiful perhaps, but complex structure of all of these strings going from one to the other. Imagine almost two wooden sticks or poles on either side, and there's a huge array of strings going from one to the other in different directions, and maybe different colors as well to illustrate different feelings or emotions, the intensity of emotions for this. And one could be perhaps a deep memory of something, or a deep expectation of that person, of what they should be doing or what they mean to me, what I mean to them. And you can imagine plucking one of those strings, how it can reverberate all of it. It can shake up everything, just the slightest touch of that, the slightest perhaps inclination of something changing that probably doesn't want to be changed. Or there's a sense of insecurity of losing that person, or that the relationship can seem like it's diminishing, and there's a sense of wanting to get out of there, to exit to that connection. And this is talking about all types of relationships, but especially those where perhaps it's more of an intimate relationship. The intensity is even more so. The attachment can be even more complicated, even more strings. And perhaps balance plays a role as well. Sometimes in my situation, looking at it now from this spaciousness, there's a huge intensity. So it wasn't just, of course, a huge mental structure of many, many thoughts and reflections, unconscious thinking about this connection. But it was almost consuming. All of the energies were focused on that. And so that almost amplifies that. When I talked about that reverberation, when there's a sense of threat or loss, and when that consumes, let's say consumes the mind, that's all it's focused on. It's obviously hyper vigilant on that, and it's more of an invitation to deeply analyze, mentally analyze, and ruminate about something where only the slightest change could have happened, or for example that person didn't call, or they didn't seem talkative, or any sort of situation where I can sense the intensification of that, amplification of that. And looking back, that was what was happening with me. So attachment can link to, as far as especially in this situation, aware of it with unconsciousness. So it doesn't mean that you can, with any person or type of relation, there could be a deep love there. There could be a deep sense of caring. You can even, thinking about that person. It's not about good and bad, but it's about in a very simple way, are you at peace? Are you anxiously worrying about this person? Often it can be a trail that gives you clues. For me, there was huge anxiety, huge in those moments of mental analysis or mental evaluation of me and this person. What's the state? What's currently going on? What are the unknowns? And there was a constant chewing on these types of thoughts. What do I mean to this person? And with that, lots of disrupted sleep, worry, anxiety, physical symptoms, perhaps with that as well, maybe pain or some tension in the body. And these are often clues, perhaps when something is out of balance. They're the natural. There's obviously the awareness, the contrast of the natural way of being in the present moment. And then there's the activity of identity. And boiling it down very simply, the activity of identity, and the activity is the attachment. And going back to the analogy of those strings, there's a tension there. So if anything changes, it reverberates the whole chronological story of you and that person. And the more strings there are, of course, it's going to be more reverberations, more pain. And there was a sense for me that things were very unbalanced there. I was almost chasing something, trying to, maybe force isn't quite the right word, but pushing to try and make more of a connection, or to maintain something. And it was done in a sense of fear, perhaps out of pain or hurt as well. A sense of fear of loss, fear that I am not enough, that I won't be, so something needs to be done to repair my importance of the value of me to that person. Me is in the identity, of course. So now we look at perhaps the diminishing of the attachment there, and perhaps one part of that ingredient is some spaciousness between me and this connection. So now almost there's a bit of an undoing, and perhaps those with the spaciousness now a little bit, the strings themselves, perhaps it was accurate to say drooping now, in that way, where the identity, the activity identity is diminishing there. So no longer acting from that space of identity that always wants more. It's always either under threat, or it's always analyzing whether there's a threat of loss. It's always intention. Doesn't want things to change necessarily, unless it's more or better. And then there's a deeper sense of, there's more at stake now, there's more to lose, when perhaps a sense of threat happens. So it's stepping away from identity. It's not, in a sense, fixing it and diving in there and trying to rearrange things, maybe a different way of thinking about this person. I can't think this way, I need to now think this way. No. Stepping out. And now acting from that spaciousness with this person. So it's now almost rebuilding, or rebuilding's not really the right word. But perhaps there's a simplification now. There's just a spaciousness at this present moment. And when perhaps a communication arises from this person, there's a response. Or if a thought arises to communicate, it gets now filtered through the awareness. And there may be a very grounding question there. Is this what I would like to do? Is this? And sometimes it's also hearing what's needed. It's almost a universe or energies going through, saying, perhaps you should contact this person, see how they're doing. And it's not done in a sense of trying to maintain something, done out of fear. Maybe it's fear that, I want to make sure that person knows I love them still, or I still like this person, or I still care about this person. And now everything's done from a deeper sense, that if there's a thought that comes to say, you get in touch with this person, it's been X amount of days or whatever time has gone by, but there's a And it's coming from a deeper sense now, no longer from the surface of the identity. And so we go back to the simplicity that nothing needs to be done now. You are just here in this moment. In a place of identity, there's always spinning plates, there's always the tension happening of trying to maintain something. But now, those strings, so-called strings, are dissolving. And perhaps a helpful action is to also invite other life situations, other activities to now help with the conditioning that's already there, to help ease that conditioning with other activities. It allows perhaps space for the deep grooves of conditioning of the rumination, repetitive thoughts that may have occurred throughout the day. It can help with that. So it's not running away or denying or pushing away, but you're almost giving it space to dissolve. Sometimes that also can mean you may bring it up into your consciousness fully, especially when perhaps a thought may arise and it may bring you back into unconsciousness, or the ruminations happen and you catch it. It may require your full attention on those sensations, those thought activities. And to hold that in awareness, to dissolve. So you're directly shining the awareness on that. And other instances, especially when it's not intense or needed, and the other activities there. For example, for me, reading is one. Mindfully reading. I'm currently reading the memoirs of Wayne Dyer at the moment. So for me, obviously, it was a spiritual reading, and it's very grounding, and that's just an example. And it's again including balance there, when perhaps there may be time or other triggers or situations where those ruminations of me and this person, or the attachment thought patterns, may have arisen. Now there's something else to help invite the awareness in a different way, an activity. And then of course when you are in awareness, there's the healing is happening there. You don't necessarily have to consciously focus on that particular connection or the identity structures that have been created. It dissolves by itself. It almost needs the egoic energy to keep it alive, to keep it maintained, to keep the tension there. Of course it likes that. Me and this person, me and this beautiful structure, mental structure of what I mean, and maintaining the mental structure. Maybe complaining about that story to somebody else, which will amplify, which will feed. And that of course can link to pain body as well. And now it's being okay with the unknown. There's a great unknown of how things may go now. And this again can include either it's a family member or a friendship or an intimate connection. And of course in the mind, it wants the control of knowing everything. Almost like a radar system. It's always trying to map out what's going on now, what are the threats of the terrain up ahead, what needs to be done, and it's all of that heaviness. And now it's in some respects you're just dealing with the present moment. There isn't really, you're not sort of holding all of these connections and relationships up in the mind. And in some ways, in this moment, no relationship exists. There's just this moment, the awareness of here and now, and the deepening in that. And everything comes from there, whether it's a response to somebody or an action may be needed. That, okay, I'd like to see this person. Let's make an arrangement, or let's send a text. And it's trusting in that. So they can still enjoy the connection, even thoughts about a person. A funny memory may arise and you can enjoy that. And so all of it here, it means that it's not a tight box of anything. It's now everything is a fluidity, there's a freedom now in this. Instead of this very sort of constraint model, go back to those two wooden sort of poles and those strings going across. Now there's just an artist's canvas that's always changing, but there is the the knowing of who you are, the space where everything arises and dissolves. All forms arise, all forms dissolve, and you are the still spaciousness that is unchanging to that. That is not reliant on anything, any form or life situation. Nothing to be maintained, nothing to be repaired. And it may mean that things may become distant with this person. Things may change now, coming from the place of awareness. So it's not the identity trying to control and manufacture and maintain. It's now understanding that whoever comes into our lives or leaves our lives, in terms of our connection with that person, where communications may dissolve, or just time that you may hear from that person less and less, and suddenly you don't hear from them at all, and there may not be an energy to want to. There may be, of course, an echo in the mind that thinks, oh, well, I still want to see this person, but in the awareness there may not be the urge to communicate with that person anymore. And it's trusting in that there's a greater intelligence there that's bringing people into your life, and obviously it's the nature of what it is. Of course, ultimately everybody's going to, nobody leaves and comes, of course. So we talk about the oneness in the most deepest sense. But other beings may, just like form arises and then may dissolve. Connections arise and dissolve. And whoever is in your life in this moment is there in a sense to serve as you serve them. in the greatest, the bird's eye view of of course, an extremely limited, understanding of the universal movements, the energy that is the activity of the universe. I recently saw a title of a video which I haven't seen, but the title sometimes is enough for the moment. It's the activity of the universe. Is a video by Rupert Spira, and yes. And as I'm reading in Wayne Dyer's book, everything is very precise. The people who come into your life is precisely the universe bringing that person in. And again, when they leave, it's not by luck or chance. Perhaps the reasons are not so important, but the trust is there that, okay, maybe that person is not needed. Which can sound a bit cold. But we go to the essence of why we are here. We're here to wake up, as Ram Dass would say. That we're here for business. We're not here for just a good time or happiness in that sense. And I mean happiness in the surface level. We're trying to chase happiness, the happiness that comes and goes, not the natural fragrance of joy that is the awareness, the natural quality of awareness. But again, for that you're not chasing that or trying to maintain or create that. And life is there to awaken us, and it will bring people in to awaken us, whether that's somebody who, it could be unconscious or conscious. It's obviously the vast intelligence of life knows what is needed for you, what's needed for me. So now, instead of the tension, the maintaining, the anxiety, the ruminating thoughts, now there's a sense of abundance for the connections there. Where there's nothing on the line, but you can appreciate what is there right now. There's people, friends, family, whatever form of, if there is an intimate relationship, it's now from abundance. And you can imagine the quality of any actions that arise from there, whether it's a simple communication or anything else that may arise. But it's now done from that vast intelligence of connection versus the very limited mind energy that's always in fluctuation, always under threat. Always constrained. So perhaps any connections that bring up these symptoms of worry and fear and threat, anger, even the polarity of happiness and sadness. Perhaps if that is like a pinball machine, great activity happening there, perhaps there's something to look into in a deeper level with that connection. Or how, if identity is out of play in that connection, if something needs to be undone, with how the relating is happening now. So moving away from identity and now bringing that connection into the awareness and allowing the awareness to take care of it, to act from there, to respond from there. And of course, there's a huge amount of pain. This is during the deep attachment phase. Of course, it's still there for me. It's still there, very close to the surface. One thought can sort of plunge me back into that attachment mental structure that's still there. But of course there's a grace to that as well. The suffering will bring you back to the awareness. The suffering for me forced me deeper, as I said in a previous episode, it forced me deeper. So even if you go off track and big mental structures are created, the suffering, the teacher of suffering, can bring you home again. And of course, there's that, I can't remember which spiritual teacher says this, but maybe it's Eckhart, says you suffer until you realize you don't need to suffer anymore. Suffering might be needed until it's not needed. And there may be future connections of whatever type where you don't need to suffer to realize, oh, there may be an attachment building here, or you don't necessarily have to, before that big mental structure is built, maybe you can sense something is forming here and you can immediately address that. You can catch the identity in the act, weaving those strings, and think, oh no. There's a faint memory here of many, many years ago in a work situation where there was two people who I was getting close with. We were having lunch together, we'd speak on a job working, and then in that moment perhaps there was less of a spiritual understanding of things being discussed now, but there was a sense in me that knew that there was something false about it, that I was acting perhaps in some inauthentic way. Looking back at it now, I can understand perhaps it was my identity trying to fit in with theirs. And then I was losing myself in theirs, and there was a noticing in that, perhaps without the understanding. And there was perhaps an abrupt, not in a conflict way, in an angry way or an argument, but there was an abrupt, I don't want to kind of keep that up anymore, and without keeping that up, perhaps I won't be wanting to have lunch with them every day, or it's immediately that patterns of behaviour can no longer sustain itself when the understanding of all of those were based on the identity to maintain something, to shape oneself into somebody, into something within somebody else's realm of how they are. And it just is a natural moving away from that company, from those people. Nothing against them, no ruminations about that, but just, okay. But moving back into my authentic self, there's not really a need to want to engage anymore. And this can happen that way where, as many teachers have said, when moving into presence and integrating that, coming from perhaps a long time of being in identity, of being in the egoic energies, things may fall away, life situations may fall away, jobs may change, friends may drop off. Those who no longer, where the identity is maintaining that, or if that connection was based on the identification. And of course you may get people of, what's happened to you? You've changed, or something's happened. And of course it may be their identity that's reacting, their strings are being reverberated now. Their models may still exist. And just a reminder to be compassionate with this process, the area of relationships, of any type of relationship, but especially an intimate one. It's, as I think Eckhart has referred to, it's one of the most difficult practices to stay in the awareness, the stillness. So to be perhaps aware of that in relationships there's obviously a deep egoic structures there at play, deep egoic energies that may pull you back in, patterns may be repeated, and to know that's okay. It's okay. Of course, we're not here again to achieve anything, to perfect anything. But perhaps just to deepen in our awareness in this moment. Of course, everything's almost a paradoxical, because in a sense maybe it's fair to say there isn't a deepening happening, there's just a more of a recognition of who you are, because you are the deepening, you are the depth. But of course it's also true in a sense that the deepening is happening, the acknowledging, the recognition is happening, and so perhaps it's okay to say it in this way as well. That in one sense a deepening is not happening, but in another sense it is. And the awareness takes care of everything. There's nothing to remember. Say, for example, you form a new connection, nothing to remember, no manual to follow of how not to create attachments. And this is a list of 50 things that need to be done. No. But just to be your true self. There's obviously a self-cleaning, self-healing quality to that. And any doing that comes from that space then doesn't leave that trace, doesn't leave any trapped energy we can call the pain body. And going back, all of those strings for that connection, like they're strumming in a guitar, and if that's not being processed or resolved, then all of that, anything that reverberates from that gets trapped, and it's now adds to the pain body. But in any doing from the awareness, it doesn't leave that trace, that residue behind, that anything trapped or unprocessed, nothing to be resolved later. So again, this comes back to karma being created. That needs to be resolved at a later time. So again, not being attached to the painting on the canvas, the temporary painting, that is always in flux and always changing. But to understand that you are the canvas itself. Where things come and go. Movements, energies, or dancing. Again, I'm sensing that if there was a bell here, that would be good to ring out the episode. But maybe that's something, again, talking about action, maybe it's obviously coming up again spontaneously, that might be needed. Okay, perhaps that's something I can acquire in some way. But until then, thank you for joining me for this episode, and I wish you well. Take care.